Hello and welcome to the National Secular Society podcast. I'm Alastair Lichten, Head of Education at the NSS. Today's episode is part 6 in a series of interviews where I speak with activists and experts about religious freedom and what it means to them. What does religious freedom truly mean? While some religious lobbyists use the term to demand privileges, this series will serve to highlight that true religious freedom means freedom of belief for people of all religions and none. This is leading up to our major conference, Secularism 2019. If this conversation whets your appetite, then I hope you'll join us at the Tower Hotel in London on the 18th of May. Details are at the end of the show. Today I spoke with Rudolf Eliott Lockhart, or Rudi, CEO of the Religious Education Council of England and Wales. Our focus was on how RE can improve understanding of freedom of and from religion, so we didn't get too deep into other RE issues. Perhaps another time. Hopefully you'll find the conversation as interesting as I did, and I'll be back at the end with a few thoughts. Enjoy. Rudi, welcome to the NSS podcast.
Thanks, it's great to be with you.
It's great to have you here. Do you want to start by introducing yourself to the audience and telling them what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I am the Chief Executive of the Religious Education Council of England and Wales. We are an education organisation who's interested in raising the standard of religious education in schools across England and Wales. We're a membership organisation, and so we've got about 63 members at the moment. They're all organisations themselves. Most of them are religion and belief organisations, and within that, we're very inclusive. So it's everyone from Anglicans to Zoroastrians and everyone in between. We're inclusive of non-religious groups. So Humanist UK have been in membership since the year we were founded 46 years ago. We've also got members who are organisations of professionals working in RE, so teachers, university lecturers, inspectors, advisors, those sorts of things. So it's a really varied membership, but based on all sorts of things that they fundamentally disagree on. But the one thing they do all agree on is that RE is really important, and they come together through us to try and raise that standard across all the schools in the country.
There's a lot going on in the world of RE reform at the moment, but today we're talking about freedom of and from religion. So what does religious freedom mean to you?
I think religious freedom means that everyone should have the right to identify with the religion that they choose, to practice that religion, and to hold whatever beliefs come along with that. But I think that there are some important qualifications to this. So when we talk about religious freedom, I want religion to be understood in its broadest sense. So if you look at Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, it tries to set out the beliefs beyond religion that should be protected under equality and human rights law. So obviously I'm really keen that non-religious beliefs should also be protected under freedom of religion. And Article 9 talks about then how you've got to define those beliefs. So they say that they've got to be genuinely held, they've got to have a certain level of cogency, of seriousness, cohesion and importance. And they've got to be beliefs rather than just opinions, and compatible with human dignity and worthy of respect in a democratic society. So I want religious freedom to protect those sorts of non-religious worldviews as well, and that's convenient because that's what the law in this country tries to do. So that's good. But the other qualification that I think is vital to remember is about the limits of religious freedom. So while religious freedom means that I've got the right to practice my religion, I don't think that means that I have the right to impose it on other people. And also, our religious freedom is potentially limited by a larger framework of rights and responsibilities that we agree on in our society. So again, my religious freedom might be limited by the need to ensure the safety of other people, or public order, as well as the rights and freedoms of other people.
So how does, or indeed should, good religious education promote religious freedom?
I think there's lots of ways. I'll give you two. So first, RE is a subject where pupils can explore how questions of freedom of religion work in practice. So an RE teacher might choose to do a lesson that uses, I don't know, say the so-called gay cake case as a start point for an exploration of these ideas. So this was the case of the bakery run by Christians who didn't want to make a cake that was going to have a slogan iced on it in support of same-sex marriage. So people might want to explore why it is that the bakers took the position that they did, what that tells you about the bakers' religion, why some other Christians disagreed with the bakers, and what that tells you about diversity of belief within a religion. You can also explore the customers' freedoms and the disagreement you get over this cake as the result of the competing beliefs. And then finally, why it is that in our pluralist society we resolve these issues in the way that we do. So you can do quite a practical exploration of freedom of belief like this, and that I think is an important part of what RE can offer here. But I think there's a broader way that RE can help promote religious freedom. I think that a key part of RE is an exploration of the other. So in RE, you end up learning about religious or non-religious worldviews that are different from your own. And you get to understand, or at least I hope you get to understand, how it's possible for your neighbour to live in the same society as you, and yet to have potentially a very different religious identity and beliefs from you, and for that to be absolutely fine. That having a different religion is, normal. So it needn't stop you from having just as good ethical code, being just as invested in building a strong shared society, and being just as good a friend and a neighbour. And it should help you, therefore, to understand why they might live their life in a different way from you. Now, I think that the empathy across religious difference that RE can therefore help inculcate is potentially a vital part of fostering a commitment to freedom of religion. So I think that sort of bigger reason is really vital.
Oh, thank you for that. How can teachers best bring these real life examples into the classroom when I think no matter what your position on religious freedom, you'd have to say that the media do a very bad job of covering cases like this?
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that. I think that's one of the reasons why having good RE is so important, and you need that space to be able to develop real critical thinking about religion and belief, and to contest the sort of media narratives that you get. And the media, and it's not just the media; it's wider society as well, is very prone to simplifying religion and turning it into a sort of cartoon caricature. And RE's got that opportunity to show its complexity, its fuzzy edges, its diversity, and pupils can have the opportunity to really develop as skilled intercultural navigators that will help them understand all of these issues much better, which I think is vital if you're then going to get to the questions about freedom of religion and belief. If you haven't got the basic foundations of understanding, you really can't navigate those sorts of questions effectively.
Which religious freedom issues do you think students are most interested in then?
I think it really depends on the pupils. It depends on the classroom. Well, as you know, some of our schools have got religious characters, and in some cases they're going to select pupils on the basis of religion.
We noticed.
And in addition, different well, of course, different religious communities are concentrated in different parts of the country. So if you take those two things together, it's really not a surprise that the demographics of religious identity can vary dramatically from school to school. And I think sometimes the issues of religious freedom that are going to interest pupils the most are going to be those that have most relevance to them and which they see playing out in their local community. So, for example, if you take the recent debate over male circumcision, after legislators in, I think it was Iceland, debated whether it should be prohibited, and there was then pushback over how much the right to circumcise should be protected as part of religious freedom or not. Now, I'm speculating here, but I think that you would probably find that schools with a large number of Jewish and Muslim pupils might be more interested in this particular issue than schools that didn't have that sort of demographic. But I think that in general, issues relating to freedom of religion really do fire up the interest of a lot of pupils. I think freedom of religion is one of those things that most people instinctively think sounds like a good thing. And people get a bit nervous about the idea of anyone trying to deny them freedom of religion. But the moment you start looking at what it means in practice, it can get really difficult, really, really contentious. And I think that most people find that both interesting and important. And then just sort of to go one step further, I think it gets really interesting when religious freedom gets turned into a vehicle for, frankly, the opposite of religious freedom. So you can see cases in America where the language of freedom of religion or religious liberty gets used by some groups as a means for asserting the rights of certain types of Christians to impose their beliefs and values on others. So here I'm thinking of cases like, the employer that used a religious freedom argument successfully at the Supreme Court to secure the right to limit the health insurance offered to employees so that it could actively exclude access to the contraceptive pill. So I think it's really fascinating, if rather scary, to see how religious freedom can effectively become code for something very, very different. And I think that can really, fire the imagination of people in the classroom too.
May it be that, and this is equally speculating, that it might be easier for pupils to explore examples of genuine and distorted religious freedom that they have less of the personal connection to. So looking at issues from abroad or from the past rather than, what's on BBC News today.
Possibly. I think it can cut both ways. There's a risk that if you're talking about things that the pupils really don't have a connection to, it can make it easier to take quite a sort of hard line view. You're maybe less likely to be a bit more nuanced about it. So in the way that you sometimes see attitudes towards I think I've got this right. So polling on things like attitudes towards Muslims wearing headscarves, sometimes you find much more opposition or much more high levels of people being uncomfortable in areas where there's actually really very few Muslims in the local community. So it's the sort of, if you don't have that personal connection, you can conjure up some extreme view in your head. So I don't know whether it's always the case that by getting away from stuff that's personal and recognizable, it becomes easier. In some ways it might make it harder. So I think it can go either way.
Yeah, I imagine it probably a bit of both. And I guess whenever we're considering social issues, it can be useful to look at the real social issue and then change the nouns and see how people react, see it, and see how students and reflect ourselves how we react differently.
Yeah, so it's an opportunity to reflect that back on yourself. So you rather than just always talking about the other, it's encouraging you to empathise, to put yourself in their shoes and see how things change when you do that.
If you were designing a course for pupils to explore freedom of and from religion from scratch and designing it from scratch, what would be your starting points?
Right. Well, I think
big question.
Yeah, interesting one. I think discussing freedom of and from religions, one of those things that becomes an awful lot easier if you've got a really solid foundation in how a range of different religious and non-religious worldviews operate. Um, I think you need to be able to really get to grips with what it is that matters to different people with different worldviews before you can really make sense of quite how difficult some of the clashes of competing rights can be. So first things first, I think you need to learn about the religions themselves. Secondly, I think you've got to make sure that you are hearing from a range of people about what freedom of religion means to them. It's only when you can grasp the complexities of how religions are actually lived by the people who adhere to them that you can really see how the tensions of freedom of religion play out. And when I say this, I don't just mean that I want to see token representation, one person from each of the so-called big six religions. Not all Christians take the same approach to things, neither do all atheists, neither do all Muslims, and so on. If you want to avoid seeing freedom of religion as a purely sort of legal issue, you've got to actually talk to people about the reality in their lives. So you need those messy case studies of what it is to them personally, and the sheer range of examples. So I'd want to root it really heavily in lived religion. But I think you clearly would also need to do that exploration of the legalities of it, of questions of rights that go much beyond questions just about religion and belief. They're wider issues of citizenship, of how social society should work. So you'd have to have that framing as well.
I guess if it was easy, we could just give students a post-it note with the text of Article 9 written on it.
Well, it wouldn't be a bad start, I'd like people to really understand that, and I'm not sure that people always do. I think it's one of the. I mean, sorry to go off topic, but one of the slightly distressing things, one of the many distressing things about debates following the EU referendum is how poorly people understand something like the European Convention on Human Rights and where that fits with our law. I'm quite scared by that, particularly when it's people in the government who seem to have some of these misunderstandings. But apologise, I stray from the issue at hand.
You've not seen our exploring secularism resources yet, so we won't dock you any points for not just saying NSS, your resources have got it absolutely perfectly right. Do you think religious education is the best subject to explore these issues? Or does it need to be linked with a wider sort of wider humanities, citizenship, politics curriculum?
I think RE is obviously one of the subjects where these issues come up and can come up a lot. And RE can certainly contribute a huge amount here. Other subjects just don't have the same amount of time to go through, thorough exploration of different religious and non-religious worldviews and the way that they interact with, the law and civil society. So RE's got a really crucial role to play. But I wouldn't want to claim that RE is the only place where you can or should discuss freedom of religion. Now, obviously, it's not my place to speak for the rest of the curriculum, but it's not going to stop me. I can certainly see a place for other subjects here. So history is one really obvious place. Plenty of opportunities to explore religious conflict and religious freedom in history. English offers great opportunities, so literature can be a fabulous way of exploring freedom of religion, depending on whatever set text you're using. I would imagine that aspects of human geography might be really useful here, and sociology as well. So yeah, there are lots of places where this can also be discussed. but I don't think this should be much of a surprise. Tolerance, respect, and individual liberty are all part of fundamental British values, and that's got to be seen as a whole school matter. So it would be really weird if we thought that engaging with freedom of religion was exclusively the job of RE. I think it'd be a real problem in a school if that was the attitude that they took. Obviously, none of this is to downplay the wonderful contribution that RE can make, but RE is an element within wider education. It relates to the rest of the curriculum. It doesn't take over the whole curriculum.
Rudi, you've spoken about the importance of understanding different people's religious perspectives when it comes to the clash of rights. And although I want to push back on that a little bit while still acknowledging the importance of the point, there is among some religious people who view religious freedom as being about their ability to impose religion, of when they're disagreed with, it's because people don't understand their religion. And this is sort of, I guess, a distorted view of religious literacy. So, if you understood my religion better, you'd understand why I need this exemption. If you had more religious literacy, you'd understand why I wanted to discriminate in this case.
Yes. I think I want to be clear here. I'm not suggesting that you should learn more about other religions, because with that increased understanding, it explains why that particular religion should be given a free pass on whatever the issue might be. If we're talking about what rights and responsibilities we have in our pluralist society, there are laws of the land that we're all subject to, and that we've got a democratic process by which we can address those. I'm very happy with that, with that system we have. What I mean is that if you don't have the proper grounding in where the other person is coming from, it's really hard to empathise with them. It's really hard to understand why it is they've got the view that they have. So you're much more likely to just want to dismiss them as just wrong, or not understanding the issue, and having some reprehensible views, perhaps. If you really get to grips with why it is they're coming from the place that they are, it makes it a lot easier to engage with. It means you can have a civil, sensible conversation about stuff. Now, I'm not saying that means that you then necessarily say, well, there's a sort of religion card that means that everything else can be bypassed. And with all rights and responsibilities, there's a constant negotiation going on in our society, and that's how it works.
I guess you could have a very detailed understanding of the diverse religious views on LGBT equality, to use the example which always comes up, and you can have a great and well-developed sense of empathy for people with different experiences, and still just say, well, yeah, but the law, this anti-discrimination law is the law, and you can understand someone's position and disagree with them. But I think there is often religious literacy, just as religious freedom is often used as a code word for something which I don't think is religious freedom. Religious literacy is often used as a code word for agreeing with or acquiescing to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very clear in my view that we've got protected characteristics in our equalities legislation, and that means that the rights of LGBT people are protected there, as they should be, and the fact that there might be, or that there are, people who might take a different view of that on the basis of their religion, they're entitled to have their view, but they're not entitled to ignore what the law of the land is. So I'm not saying in any way understand about religions so that you can somehow ignore what the law is. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying understand the religions so that you realize why things are contentious in the way that they are. Why there is anxiety about whatever the issue that you're considering is. I'm not saying that in the liberal pluralist society we should necessarily give up any of these carefully won rights that we have.
That's a really good way of putting it. One potentially contentious religious freedom or religious freedom adjacent issue within the world of RE is the right to withdraw from religious education.
Sure. So there's been a right for parents to withdraw their children from religious education for almost 150 years now, and it's a function of the history of the subject, which used to be religious instruction, and so this right of withdrawal for parents, or for parents to withdraw their children, was very much intended to safeguard the religious freedom of those children. So if you were at a school where the religious instruction was not in accordance with the religious identity that you had, you would be able to be withdrawn from those classes. Now, the subject has changed an awful lot over the years, and I would hope that RE is something that every child in the country would benefit from. But that right of withdrawal is still there. Now, it's now tied up in the European legislation. The key issue being that parents still have the right for their children to be educated according to their own philosophical tenets. So parents still have that right of withdrawal, and it would be necessary to show that the subject is objective, critical, and pluralistic for pupils to be no longer having the right of withdrawal from the subject. Now, that's a really difficult thing to guarantee in legal terms. Obviously, I want to try and make sure that the curriculum is objective, critical, and pluralistic. I mean, who wouldn't want that? That's a really sensible education thing to be trying to pursue. But in legal terms, very hard to guarantee. We've still got some schools where individual teachers might be appointed because of their religious position, particularly if they're heads of departments in those schools. So you could easily say, well, the delivery of the subject, therefore, might not be objective, critical, and pluralistic. We've got schools where religious authorities have a role in setting the curriculum. Now, those authorities will be striving to try and provide an education which they would argue is objective, critical, and pluralistic. But I think it's quite likely that the courts would find it harder to go along with that line if there was some sort of test case should the right of withdrawal be taken away. Now, the really frustrating thing here is that there are increasing numbers of people who are using the right of withdrawal for ways that the law was not intended originally. So some people are using it for Islamophobic and anti-Semitic reasons. And we've seen examples of template letters produced by some far-right organisations encouraging parents to withdraw their children, saying, I don't want my child to go to the mosque, or I don't want my child to learn about Islam. And parents have that right to withdraw their child, and they don't actually have to justify why they're doing it. So this is really difficult. Those children who are being withdrawn for what look like Islamophobic reasons are exactly the sorts of children who I think would benefit the most from good RE. But we've got this problem that for very sensible human rights reasons, parents are entitled to withdraw their children should they choose so. Now, there's a lot of people in the world of RE, I'd say the vast majority of people in the world of RE, who want to get rid of that right of withdrawal. They say, the subject's moved on, it's time to get rid of it. And the recent Commission on Religious Education made a recommendation here, and I think some people were rather disappointed to see that the recommendation was not to get rid of the right of withdrawal. Now, the Commission did this because I think it recognised that the legal problems were just too difficult to get around, and I'm inclined to agree with the Commission on this one. So I think what we need is better guidance for head teachers on how to deal with parents making what look like Islamophobic requests. And there's good guidance that's just come out from NAHT, National Association of Head Teachers, and NATRE, the National Association of Teachers of RE. But I think the government needs to do more here. I think the government needs to make sure that heads understand exactly what they can and can't do, and what options they have under things like Prevent to flag up issues of concern. And for the focus to be on dealing with prejudicial behaviour, Islamophobic behaviour or anti-Semitic behaviour, rather than getting tangled up in what I think will be a fruitless legal argument over whether parents should have that right of withdrawal or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's one of the things that shows that religious freedom it does lead to sort of messy compromises, and if you enshrine a right very similar to the right to freedom of speech, you're going to get people who use that right in an antisocial way, or a way that might itself be harmful to a civil pluralistic society. I think there's definitely a difference in the religious freedom balances between a school where RE is being genuinely taught in a pluralistic the word objective, I know nothing can ever be truly objective, but aiming towards being non-directive way, versus the way in which religion is still taught in many schools. I guess also a lot of people exercising the right to withdraw from RE because for lots of reasons the subject is not always at the level that it is in the best examples, or in the examples that we'd like to see more of.
Yeah, I think there's widespread misunderstanding about what the subject religious education actually is. I think there's a lot of people whose instant reaction on hearing, or even just hearing its name, is to think that it's somehow about making children religious. And I'm really keen to try and show that that's not the case, and to try and break that down. I want people to realise that the subject is totally embracing the study of non-religious worldviews alongside religious ones. And indeed to show that it's not as simple as splitting into religious and non-religious. There's a huge messy overlap between the two. People are complicated. They borrow if they're non-religious, they borrow a whole lot of religious ideas a lot of the time, and if they're religious, there's a whole load of non-religious stuff that they also draw from. I want to show that it's a subject that really encourages critical engagement. So it's not about making someone more religious. It's not about making someone less religious, even though for some pupils it'll do that either way, and that's fine. So I think one of the things we can do is we can talk about a proposed change of name for the subject. And again, the Commission on Religious Education did recommend a new name, because I think religious education as a name is freighted with an awful lot of assumptions. So the Commission talked about renaming the subject as Religion and Worldviews. So religion singular to illustrate that it's a subject that engages with the concept of religion, and gets people to think about, what religion actually is, how it operates, what the boundary between religion and non-religion actually is, and worldviews plural, second part of the name, because that shows the scope of things that could be studied within the subject. And I think that will be a really helpful way of talking about the subject, and might make it easier for the wider public to understand what it is that we're hoping that children do in these lessons.
Yeah, we will link to the Commission on RE report in the show notes. I'll just say it's such a big subject that we hopefully maybe we'll get into it on another occasion. Audience can find the National Secular Society's view on RE and our view on the right to withdraw, which I would say I think is quite nuanced and does take on board a lot of the stuff you've said there at reformre.org. Rudi, it's been great chatting to you today. Before you go, we always like to ask our guests if they have any recommendations for books or films which they think do a good job of exploring religious freedom.
Well, there's loads of films that make an interesting entry point to the subject, but I think it's often the nature of films that they're often going to be polemics in favour of a particular position. So I don't know how nuanced some of the things I could suggest would necessarily be. I'm tempted to be difficult or whatever, and suggest D.W. Griffith's epic Intolerance, back from 1916, which basically says that intolerance, including religious intolerance, is bad. Although, of course, if you're being a cynic, you might say that what it's really about is him atoning for having made his earlier blockbuster, the pro-KKK film Birth of a Nation, which is a little bit of a smear on his record. But I mean, I could go on for ages. There are loads of other interesting films. If you let me say, there's a couple of recent documentaries that might make interesting viewing about what's happening in America. So a couple of years ago, or less, there was The Most Hated Woman in America, about Madeleine Murray O'Hair, who was the atheist activist who was kidnapped and murdered in the 1990s. So that's quite an interesting one to try. And there's one I haven't actually seen this one yet, but I really want to, and I think your listeners might be intrigued from the sound of it. It's called Hail Satan, and it's a documentary about the Satanic Temple in the US, which, if I understand it correctly, is a group that I don't know whether they really are Satanists. I think they probably pose as Satanists in order to pose some really interesting legal.
They're allegorical Satanists.
Yes. So there are some really interesting legal questions about religious liberty, and showing some of the I think hypocrisy of the way in which religious liberty is sometimes interpreted in the US, and the reaction from that. And from the sounds of things, that documentary sounds really good. But as I say, I haven't actually seen it, so I can't be held responsible if anyone does go off and see it and it isn't their cup of tea.
Oh well, we'll have links in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to plug before you go?
Well, I've mentioned the Commission on Religious Education, but I think it's worth mentioning again. The final report came out last September. It is arguably the most important publication in the world of religious education for 50 years. It's promoting or recommending a radical program of reform of the subjects, which has had a lot of support from a wide range of different organisations. So National Secular Society has been pretty positive about it, but so has the Church of England. And I think if you can get responses from those sorts of groups all being positive, that's got to be quite a good thing. So I would recommend checking that out.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
There are some great recommendations from Rudi. We'll have links in the show notes, and remember that you can find our range of book and film reviews at secularism.org.uk/reviews. I do just want to say something about the film America's Most Hated Woman. I have been told that the film advances the theory that Madeleine Mary O'Hare was embezzling from American atheists. I haven't seen the film and I'm not familiar with the full history, but as I understand it, that has been debunked. To be clear, this smear is victim blaming. It is a common trope to undermine human rights activists by accusing them of being in it for the money, and it's particularly hurtful for some because in a very real way, this smear led to Madeleine's abduction and death. Spoiler warning. I'm still looking forward to watching the film at some point, and I still thank Rudi for the recommendation. I just wanted to note that. Before I go, I want to give Secularism 2019 a plug. It's the upcoming major conference that this series of interviews is leading up to. It's on Saturday, 18th of May 2019, and all the details are on our website. If you're thinking about coming along but are undecided, please let me give you a quick pitch for why you should come. Firstly, the value for money is fantastic. It's a full-day conference in a stellar venue with an internationally esteemed lineup of speakers, refreshments, awards ceremony and drinks reception. Student tickets are just £10, NSS members £25, even the full-price non-member tickets are a steal at £50. It's been almost 3 years since we did an event of this scale. You don't want to miss out on being in the room with this group of activists and experts, the opportunity to draw inspiration and make connections. Just visit secularism.org.uk/2019, that's 2019 for all the details. If you have any feedback on the podcast, please get in touch. You can support the podcast by sharing us on social media or joining the National Secular Society today. Until next time, I've been Alastair Lichten, thanking you for joining me. Goodbye.